It's an excerpt from a longer dance piece that is actually performed on the street. And I'll talk about the venue, the street, but in order to talk about that, we need to talk about Filipino-American histories in San Francisco, particularly Filipino-American labor histories and community-based histories in San Francisco from the 1920s to the 1960s. And what Pearl is doing as a choreographer, you'll notice that the costuming consists of men and women wearing suspenders, period costume. It's there to harken an older period of Filipino-American laborers in San Francisco, but particularly those that came to the United States and Hawaii in the 1920s and 1930s as part of the serialized form of labor, which they participated in all throughout that West Coast and inner territory of Hawaii. Hawaii was not yet a state at that time, right? So from the 1920s, they begin laboring all throughout the western United States, and by the 1960s, they are elderly men and women that are living in what's known in the San Francisco Bay Area, San Francisco proper, as Manila Town. Manila Town by the 1960s and 70s consisted of 10 square blocks next to Chinatown. Who's been to Chinatown here in San Francisco? Okay. Next to Chinatown, which is the oldest Chinatown in the United States, was Manila Town. Manila Town itself consisted of 10 square blocks of the San Francisco downtown. From 10 square blocks, it got pushed into 1 square block, from 1 square block to 1 building, and that 1 building consisted of affordable housing for these aging Filipino laborers in San Francisco. Again, not only Filipino, but also Chinese laborers, African American laborers as well. Became one of their last residential homes, residences in the United States. And throughout the 1970s, it also represented a struggle for affordable housing, because as the city became more gentrified, as city planners wanted to create the Wall Street of the West, they began tearing down or building up old neighborhoods and transforming those places. And at the very edge of San Francisco's Chinatown is the new financial district. You'll see the Transamerica Pyramid that is an icon to the city. Well, at the foot of that pyramid was Manila Town, and again the struggle for this one last bit of what used to be a 10 square block community. The struggle to maintain and save that one hotel called the International Hotel. When it finally came down, when the International Hotel was finally destroyed in the 1970s, this major struggle, this major community-based struggle in San Francisco left an indelible mark among Filipino communities. Older Filipinos, as well as the children, great-grandchildren that followed in their way. And we're thinking about Pearl Obama. How does this dancer then think about the loss of affordable housing for Filipino Americans in the city? She does so by commemorating a dance piece right on the very block of where the hotel used to be. So rather than host a dance piece in a proscenium inside a hall, she brought out clean lights out onto the street, obtained city permits, and performed what you saw there, that excerpt, actually out on the street to commemorate the loss of this hotel. Again, very powerful and very gripping for a community to deal with what it means to think about ancestors in San Francisco's past. Second example concerning how Filipino Americans then make these aesthetic choices dealing with their past. This is from the work of Ralph Peña, some of you might know, Ralph Peña and Theo Born in the Philippines in 1963, Ralph Peña left for the United States at the age of 10 and then returned for his high school years when he began to work with the Philippine Educational Theater Association, PETA. Throughout the 1980s, Peña worked in a variety of community-based street theater settings, many times working against the Marcos administration. In 1984, his father sent him to Orange County, California, which he hated, because it happens to be a bastion of right-wing, white, conservative living. Some people like it. And yet, he continued his own theater work and training. By 1991, he had made another move, this time from Orange County, California, to New York City, all the way across the country, where he and a group of actors founded Theater Mahi, which is an Obie Award-winning theater company, Obie meaning off-Broadway. As a playwright, his works include Flipzoids, Project Balagiga, This End Up, Loose Leaf Bindings. He received an Obie Award for his work on this next play called The Romance of Malcolm Rubio. So here's another clip. Again, dealing with how Philippine Americans interpret their past.
Short men, all I like women big or small women big. I like 6 feet 195.
Oh, she'll eat you alive.
He has never seen trouble. I'm concerned. Buy a magazine.
What do you need to know about love, man? As love and pain to nothingness do to say. Come on, no, I don't take sides. That's anything to do with it.
Oh, say flower. It's something a girl that's never seen.
The Arkansas Hills and Little Rock Reeds.
A girl twice the size, sideward, and up in the reading bikini.
Why were they
Mother, screws up his fish eyes, they shine like mud. They're about to pop out, they're pounding with blood.
He jumps up so fast like a monkey in heat.
He bites off a chunk of chewing the man. He gulps up a wad and spits on his feet and leaps in the air and rolls. I love her!
Okay, some of you might be familiar with The Romance of Malcolm Rubio. It was performed here, I believe a year or two ago, CCP? Maybe not. All right, it was a play then. It was Lonnie Carter's adaptation of Carlos Bulosan's play, of Carlos Bulosan's short story of the same name. It's done completely in verse, and it has toured New York as well as Honolulu and even here in Manila. Again, the idea of Filipino Americans wanting to reinterpret this story, to me, is a fascinating story for a number of reasons. One is that, at the very base of it, is the idea of this young Filipino boy in the early 19-teens and 20s in California, pining for a blonde woman that he's only known through magazine pictures. You know what I mean? I mean, now it's not a magazine. Now it's just click, point, oh, send me a gift, tip, JPEG, blah, blah, blah. He falls completely in love, and this idea of this romance between a dark-skinned, short, working-class boy in California falling for a tall, voluptuous blonde woman, the prize of American lust, to me has universal as well as particular appeal. The universal aspect of it is that people are attracted to the idea of romance that transcends race, class, and gender. But then there's also this notion of something that is uniquely American about anti-miscegenation laws in the United States. And if we think about how there were so many laws that prevented men and women of various skin colors from getting together, from either having marriages or being couples in any form of legal way. In many ways, those first anti-miscegenation laws, I mean, those laws that would prevent races of different color from marrying, when do you think those actually were passed? When were they first passed, do you think, in the United States? This is just a trivia that I'm bringing from the United States. The United States formally, they ratified the Constitution in 1789, 1776 they declared their independence from the British. When do you think the first anti-miscegenation laws were passed in the United States? And it's kind of a trick question. Anti-miscegenation laws, right? Laws that prevented the coupling. What do you think? Shout it out. 1860s? Why do you think that? That's a good guess. Lincoln. Mm-hmm. Slavery, tore us all apart. That's a good guess. Anyone else? Much earlier than that, though. Sorry. 1930s? earlier than that.